a widowed rancher saves an Apache woman from disaster and discovers her dark secret. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the rugged hills of Arizona, casting long shadows over the dry, dusty land. John Fletcher, a widowed rancher in his early 50s, walked along the edge of his property, inspecting the fences that had suffered from a recent storm. His boots crunched against the rocky soil as he squinted against the fading light. Years of working alone had made him attentive to the smallest details: the slight sag in a fence post, the way the wind bent the grass, or the tracks left by a wandering coyote. Every corner of his ranch was familiar to him, yet the solitude often made the land feel emptier than it truly was. John had been living on this ranch for nearly 20 years. His wife, Margaret, had passed away suddenly, leaving a silence in the house and a hollow ache in his heart. After her death, John buried himself in work, tending to the cattle and maintaining the land, finding comfort in routine and the rhythm of daily chores. The ranch had become his refuge, a place where grief could be tamed by labor. But even in his solitude, he sometimes felt the heavy weight of loneliness pressing down, especially in the quiet moments at dusk when the world seemed to hold its breath. On this particular evening, the sky was heavy with clouds that threatened rain, though the storm had already passed earlier that day. John had been walking near the canyon that bordered his property, checking for damage caused by the flash floods that often struck the area without warning. As he carefully stepped over wet rocks and fallen branches, a sudden, sharp cry cut through the air. It was faint at first, almost swallowed by the wind, but unmistakably human. John froze, listening. There it was again, a desperate, pleading sound, raw and urgent. Instinct took over. John raced toward the canyon, his heart pounding not from the exertion, but from an unfamiliar sense of worry. He had lived in these lands long enough to know that danger could appear without warning: injured animals, sudden rockslides, or lost travelers. But the sound of human suffering always stirred something deep inside him. When he reached the edge of a steep ravine, he saw her. A young woman, her dark hair clinging to her face, was pinned beneath a fallen tree limb. Water from a small stream churned around her legs, threatening to drag her further down the canyon. Her clothes were torn and she shivered from the cold, but her eyes, wide and frightened, met his, pleading for help. Without thinking twice, John descended carefully but quickly, gripping rocks and branches for support. He reached her side, kneeling on the slippery ground. "It's okay, I've got you," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. The woman's lips trembled and she tried to speak, but only a hoarse gasp came out. John's hands were strong and practiced as he lifted the heavy limb just enough to free her. Carefully, he helped her stand, supporting her weight as they climbed toward safer ground. Once they were out of immediate danger, John led her to his horse, which he had left tied near the edge of the canyon. She leaned heavily on him, her strength nearly gone. I don't know what happened," she whispered, her voice barely audible. John nodded, offering her a reassuring smile. "It's all right, you're safe now, just hold on." He helped her onto the horse, then climbed up behind her, gripping the reins. The ride back to the ranch was slow, but John didn't mind. He kept a hand lightly on her back, steadying her with a gentleness that surprised even him. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in shades of pink and orange. The ranch house stood in quiet solitude, its wooden walls weathered by years of wind and sun. John led the horse to the stable and guided the woman inside. She looked around with cautious eyes, taking in the simple furnishings, the smell of hay, and the faint aroma of wood smoke from the hearth. John gestured for her to sit in a chair near the fire, then fetched a blanket to wrap around her trembling shoulders. "I'm John Fletcher," he said, offering a hand which she shook weakly. "What's your name?" "Yana," she replied softly. The name carried a musical quality, yet there was a shadow of pain behind it. She did not explain why she was in the canyon or how she had ended up in such a perilous situation. John decided not to press her. Sometimes, people needed time to trust before they shared their stories. John tended to her wounds with care. He cleaned the cuts on her arms and legs, binding them with strips of cloth. He poured a cup of warm tea, which she sipped quietly, still wary but grateful. For hours, they sat near the fire in a comfortable silence. John was a man of few words, and Ayanna seemed to mirror his caution, observing him with careful eyes. Yet, beneath her initial fear, there was a spark of determination, a quiet resilience that did not go unnoticed. As the night deepened, John found himself studying her more closely. She was young, likely in her mid-20s, with features that spoke of her Apache heritage, high cheekbones, dark, expressive eyes, and hair as black as the midnight sky. There was a strength in her posture, even when exhausted, a sense that she had endured far more than she should have had to at her age. John could not help but feel a mixture of admiration and concern. He had spent so many years alone that the presence of another person, especially someone so intriguing and mysterious, stirred emotions he thought he had buried long ago. Ayanna, meanwhile, struggled with conflicting feelings of fear and relief. She had trusted no one in weeks, perhaps months. The canyon incident had left her vulnerable, and the kindness shown by this rugged, older man was unexpected. Yet she felt an unease she could not ignore. Her past was a secret, one she could not yet reveal, and the thought of being discovered by anyone sent a shiver down her spine. For now, she remained quiet, observing John's actions and silently questioning whether he could be trusted. John, sensing her hesitation, did not push. Instead, he shared small stories of his life, tales of ranch work, cattle drives, and memories of his late wife. His voice was steady, warm, and without judgment. Slowly, Ayanna began to relax, letting the fire's warmth seep into her bones and the simple comfort of being in a safe place calm her nerves. By midnight, she had fallen asleep in the chair, exhausted from her ordeal. John watched her for a while, feeling an unexpected tenderness. He felt protective of her, a feeling he had not experienced since Margaret had passed. That night, as the wind whispered against the wooden walls of the ranch house, John sat alone by the fire. He reflected on the strange turn of events, realizing that his quiet life was about to change in ways he could not yet imagine. Ayanna's presence had stirred something deep within him, not just concern, but curiosity and a hope that life could hold new beginnings, even after loss. He did not yet know her story, nor the secrets she carried, but one thing was certain. His life, once predictable and solitary, had been touched by a force he could neither ignore nor fully understand. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, twinkling against the vast Arizona sky. The ranch lay silent, the only sounds being the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. For the first time in years, John felt a sense of anticipation. There were questions to be answered, dangers perhaps still lurking, and a connection forming between two very different lives. And though neither of them knew what the future held, they had, in that stormy evening and desperate canyon, found a fragile, yet undeniable, beginning. The days that followed the storm were quiet, yet filled with a subtle tension that neither John Fletcher nor Ayanna could ignore. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm once again, though it was different now. Where there had been only the sound of the wind across the plains and the lowing of cattle, there was now the soft, cautious presence of Ayanna. She moved carefully around the ranch, helping with small chores when she could, though she often lingered near the fire or watched the landscape in silence. John noticed her strength, her attention to detail, and the way she seemed to understand the land almost instinctively. John continued to care for her injuries, tending to her cuts and bruises while making sure she had enough food and water. Ayanna rarely spoke of herself, answering his questions with short, careful words. Yet there was a growing trust between them, fragile but noticeable. John sensed that she was testing the waters, gauging whether he was someone she could rely on. And slowly, day by day, she allowed herself to relax a little, revealing glimpses of the person she truly was. One morning, John was up before sunrise, walking along the fence line to inspect the grazing areas. Iana followed quietly behind him, her bare feet careful on the dew-soaked ground. "You move well for someone who hasn't lived here long," John said, breaking the silence. She glanced at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "I grew up near land like this," she said softly. "I know how to read it even if I haven't worked it myself." John nodded, impressed. There was something in her voice that suggested experience beyond her years, a wisdom that came not from books or schooling, but from observing and surviving. He realized that her quiet nature was not weakness, as some might assume, but a sign of resilience. In many ways, she reminded him of Margaret, his late wife, strong, careful, and quietly determined. But Ayanna carried a weight he could not yet understand, a shadow in her eyes that made him cautious. Over the next few days, John tried to make her feel more comfortable. He showed her around the ranch, teaching her how to check the fences, tend to the animals, and understand the rhythms of ranch life. Ayanna watched closely, sometimes mimicking his movements, sometimes asking questions. She had a natural aptitude for tasks that required patience and care, and John found himself admiring her skills. Slowly, he began to feel something he had not felt in years, the hope that life could hold companionship again. Yet even as she grew more comfortable, Ayanna remained guarded. There were moments when she would drift away into the woods or sit by the river for hours, lost in thought. John respected her space, knowing that trust could not be forced. One afternoon he found her sitting on a fallen log, sketching in a small notebook she had brought with her. He approached quietly. "What are you drawing?" he asked. Ayanna looked up, her eyes cautious but open. "The land," she said simply. "It helps me think." John nodded, intrigued by the simple honesty in her words. He could sense that her drawings were more than just pictures. They were a way for her to process her experiences, to capture the beauty and danger she had faced. For a moment, he imagined the hardships she must have endured, surviving alone in a world that could be both cruel and unforgiving. As the days passed, John began to share more of his own story. He told her about Margaret, about the early days of their marriage and the struggles they had faced together on the ranch. He spoke of the loneliness he had felt since her passing and the comfort he had found in the routine of work. Ayanna listened quietly, her expression thoughtful, occasionally nodding as if to acknowledge the depth of his experiences. Though she did not share much about her own past, there was a growing connection between them, a sense that their lives, though different, had begun to intertwine. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted with shades of gold and pink, John and Ayanna sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the cattle graze in the fading light. The air was warm but carried the faint chill of approaching night. "Do you miss your home?" John asked gently. Ayanna hesitated, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. I don't have a home anymore," she admitted quietly. Her voice was steady, but there was a sadness beneath it, a loss that seemed too heavy for words. John felt a pang of sympathy. He knew the feeling of losing one's place in the world, of being uprooted by circumstances beyond control. "This can be your home if you want it," he said softly. Ayanna looked at him, her eyes searching his face. She did not answer immediately, but the slight nod she gave him was enough. It was not a full acceptance, not yet, but it was a step, a recognition that she could allow herself to stay, at least for a while. John felt a quiet relief, knowing that their bond was growing, fragile but real. Over the following week, Ayanna began to participate more actively in ranch life. She helped feed the animals, repaired fences, and even assisted John in preparing meals. Her skills and determination impressed him, and he found himself relying on her more than he had expected. Yet, He remained aware of the invisible walls she maintained around herself, understanding that her past was something she guarded closely. He resolved not to push her, to allow her to reveal her story in her own time. One afternoon, while tending to the cattle, John noticed Ayanna pause near the edge of the property, staring at the distant mountains with a faraway expression. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She did not answer immediately, instead tightening her grip on the fence post she had been leaning against. "The past," she said finally. "Things I left behind. Things I shouldn't think about." Her voice was quiet, almost fearful, and John sensed the weight of her unspoken experiences. He did not press further. Some stories, he knew, were not ready to be told, and trust had to grow slowly, like the steady flow of a river carving its way through rock. Despite the unspoken tension, moments of lightness began to emerge between them. Gianna had a quiet sense of humor, often making small, clever remarks that brought a rare smile to John's face. He found himself laughing more than he had in years, the sound echoing across the ranch and mingling with the calls of birds and the lowing of cattle. There was a simplicity in these moments that he cherished, a reminder that life, even in its hardships, could hold joy and companionship. However, the peace was not without its challenges. One morning, while checking the water supply, John noticed that some of the fences had been damaged again, likely by stray cattle from a neighboring ranch. He began repairing them immediately, and Ayanna offered to help. As they worked side by side, their movements synchronized in a natural rhythm, a silent understanding passing between them. Yet, John could see the hesitation in her eyes when he offered guidance, the unspoken fear that she was not entirely safe. He decided to tread carefully, giving her space while offering support. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between John and Ayanna grew stronger. There was an unspoken agreement between them: respect, patience, and quiet companionship. John found himself thinking of her often, wondering about the secrets she carried and the dangers she might still face. Ayanna, in turn, began to trust him, sharing small details about her life, her connection to the land, and her experiences surviving alone. Each revelation was a step toward deeper understanding, a bridge spanning the distance between their worlds. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together by the fire, the flickering flames casting warm light on their faces. "I feel safer here," Ayanna admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. John reached out and placed a reassuring hand on hers. "You are safe," he said simply. "I promise you that." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and for the first time in weeks, Ayanna allowed herself to relax completely, trusting that this man, this stranger who had become her protector, would not abandon her. The night stretched on, filled with the quiet sounds of the ranch, the soft breathing of cattle, the rustling of leaves, and the distant call of an owl. John and Ayanna sat in companionable silence, each lost in thought. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that their lives were on the brink of change. Both understood that challenges lay ahead, that the past could not remain hidden forever. But for now, in this fragile bubble of safety and trust, they found comfort in each other's presence, a connection that promised hope and perhaps a new beginning. The days on the ranch continued in their quiet rhythm, but a shadow had begun to settle over John Fletcher and Gianna. Though their bond had grown stronger, there were moments when the past pressed against the edges of their fragile peace. Gianna became more reserved at times, her thoughts drifting beyond the safety of the ranch to memories she had long tried to bury. John noticed the way her hands would tremble slightly when certain thoughts appeared to haunt her, or how she would stare at the horizon for hours, lost in a distant world. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by wandering cattle, John noticed that Ayanna seemed unusually tense. She moved with caution, glancing around the ranch and the surrounding hills as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. "What's troubling you?" John asked gently, his voice calm but filled with concern. Gianna hesitated, biting her lower lip before speaking. "It's nothing," she said quickly, though the unease in her eyes betrayed her words. John knew better than to force her, but he could sense that something was coming, a revelation she was not ready to share. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, John went to check on Ayana. He found her near the river, sitting on a flat rock with her sketchbook open. She was drawing, but the images were darker than before, storms over the land, figures in shadow, and places she seemed afraid to name. John knelt beside her, studying the sketches. "These are intense," he said softly. Ayana glanced up, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and shame. "I can't help it," she whispered. "These are memories I can't escape. I try to forget, but they come back anyway." John understood. He had his own ghosts, memories of Margaret, of mistakes he could not undo, but he could feel the weight of hers pressing down on her in ways he had never experienced. "You don't have to share them if you're not ready," he said gently. "But know that you're not alone here." Yana looked at him, the tension in her shoulders softening slightly. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe fully, leaning back on the rock and letting the river's gentle flow calm her restless thoughts. But the peace was short-lived. A few days later, John discovered signs that something or someone was approaching the ranch. Footprints near the property line, fresh in the soft earth, suggested that they had been followed. John's heart raced, but he did not panic. He had lived in these lands long enough to recognize danger when it came quietly. He called Ayana aside, and she immediately tensed, her dark eyes widening with fear. "It's them," she said in a low voice. John raised his eyebrows. "Who?" Gianna took a deep breath, hesitating as if weighing her words carefully. "My people," she admitted. I can't explain everything yet, but I am being hunted. They think I did something terrible and they won't stop until they find me." Her voice trembled, though she spoke with determination. John felt a chill run down his spine. Though he had been prepared for physical dangers, storms, wild animals, accidents, he had not anticipated this. Now, the safety of the ranch and of Ayana was at stake in ways he could not control. Determined to protect her, John began making preparations. He reinforced the fences, checked the horses, and even kept a closer eye on the surrounding hills. Ayana watched silently, her mind racing. She knew that hiding here could only last for so long. The people searching for her were persistent and resourceful. She also knew that her secret, if revealed too soon, could bring more harm than good. Yet, she trusted John more than anyone she had encountered in months, perhaps years, and that trust gave her a measure of courage she had almost forgotten. One evening, John and Ayana were sitting by the fire when she finally spoke more about her past. "I was accused of something I didn't do," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. John listened intently, nodding for her to continue. "My tribe, they think I betrayed them, but I didn't. I only tried to help someone and it went wrong. They don't understand and now they want me gone. I ran because I had no choice." Her dark eyes glistened in the firelight, and John felt a mix of anger and sympathy. She was a victim of circumstances she could not control, yet she had survived through strength and determination. John reached out and placed a hand on hers. "You did what you had to do to survive," he said firmly, "and I will do everything I can to keep you safe. This ranch is your home, and I won't let anyone take that away." Yana's lips trembled into a small, grateful smile. For the first time, she felt the weight of her isolation lessen, replaced by the quiet strength of having someone who truly cared. Despite the growing trust between them, danger was closing in. A few nights later, a faint sound outside the ranch woke John. He slipped quietly from his room and peered through the window, noticing figures moving in the darkness near the edge of the property. He woke Ayana, and together they moved quietly to the barn, using the horses as cover. John's heart pounded as he realized the seriousness of the situation. These were not strangers. They knew the land, and they knew what they were looking for. Yana's fear was palpable, but she did not panic. Instead, she whispered instructions to John about how to stay hidden, how to move quietly, and how to avoid being seen. Her knowledge of her pursuers' patterns and habits was precise, and John followed her lead. Together, they remained still as the figures passed near the barn, their flashlights sweeping over the area without detecting the hidden pair. When the danger had passed, they exhaled slowly, realizing just how close they had come to being discovered. The next morning, John could see the tension etched into Ayana's face. He decided to confront the reality they were facing. "We need a plan," he said firmly. "You can't stay hidden forever, and I can't protect you from everything. But we can work together, figure out a way to deal with this before it becomes worse." Ayana nodded slowly, her jaw set with determination. "I know," she said. "I have to face them eventually, but not yet. I need time to prepare." Over the following days, John and Ayana began to strategize. They reinforced the ranch's perimeter, set up alarms and signals, and practiced ways to move quietly if they needed to escape. John marveled at Ayana's resourcefulness and courage. She had been through hardships he could only imagine, and yet she remained calm and focused. There was a quiet strength in her that he had not expected, and he found himself admiring her even more. At the same time, the bond between them deepened. They shared meals, laughter, and small stories from their lives, finding comfort in the ordinary moments despite the looming danger. John began to feel hope again, a sense that life could be meaningful even after loss. Yana, in turn, allowed herself to relax in his presence, knowing that she had someone she could trust completely. The quiet moments on the porch, watching the sun set over the plains, became a sanctuary where they could forget, if only briefly, the shadows of the past. But the tension never fully disappeared. One afternoon, while walking along the river, John noticed Ayana suddenly stop and tense. She stared across the water at the distant hills, her eyes narrowing. "They're coming closer," she whispered. John followed her gaze, but the distance was too great to see clearly. He trusted her instincts. They had been accurate before. Together, they returned to the ranch with a renewed sense of urgency, knowing that the time of hiding was limited. As night fell, John kept a close watch while Ayana rested near the fire. He reflected on how much had changed in a matter of weeks. When he first found her trapped in the canyon, he had felt a simple desire to help. Now, he felt responsibility, care, and something deeper, a connection that neither of them had expected. And he realized that their lives were no longer separate. The dangers that Ayana carried with her were now his to bear as well, and he accepted that without hesitation. The night passed without incident, but the awareness of what was to come hung over them like a cloud. Ayana's secret, once carefully hidden, was becoming harder to conceal. The pursuit was relentless, and the consequences of discovery could be dire. Yet in the quiet moments between fear and preparation, John and Ayana found solace in each other's presence. They had survived storms, floods, and solitude. Now, they would face the challenges of the past together. And though uncertainty loomed, there was a growing certainty that whatever came, they would face it side by side. The calm of the ranch was gone. A tense energy hung over the land like the heat of a desert sun at noon. John Fletcher could feel it in every footstep he took, in every glance toward the hills and the canyon edges. The previous days had been quiet, but he knew it was only the calm before the storm. Yana had grown more anxious, her dark eyes often scanning the horizon, and John could sense her fear without words. She had survived so much on her own, yet now the danger that pursued her threatened both of them. One afternoon, while checking the cattle, John noticed movement in the distance. At first, it seemed like shadows cast by the setting sun, but then he saw figures slowly approaching the ranch, moving with purpose. His heart sank. Gianna was nearby and he immediately called to her. She came running, her face pale but determined. "They're here," she whispered. "We don't have much time." John nodded, taking a deep breath to steady himself. The ranch, once a place of quiet refuge, had become a battleground for trust, courage, and survival. They quickly went over the preparations they had made. Fences were reinforced, escape routes mapped, and signals in place in case they needed to act fast. John's hands were steady as he moved through the barn, checking the horses, while Ayanna made sure the gates and paths were clear. They worked in silence, their unspoken bond stronger than ever. Both knew the importance of the coming confrontation. It was no longer a question of if, but when. As dusk fell, the figures reached the edge of the ranch. John and Ayanna hid near the barn, using the shadows for cover. The pursuers' voices were low but commanding, calling out her name. John could hear the intensity in their tones, the determination that made the danger undeniable. Ayanna's hands were steady, but her breath came fast. She leaned close to John, whispering instructions about how to move quietly, how to remain unseen. Her knowledge of the land and the tactics of those searching for her was precise, and John followed her lead, trusting completely in her instincts. The night stretched on, tense and silent, as they watched the figures search the property. At one point, a flashlight beam swept dangerously close to their hiding spot. John's heart raced, but he did not move. Ayanna remained calm, signaling him to stay still. Minutes felt like hours as the figures moved past them without noticing. Finally, the voices faded into the distance, leaving only the whisper of the wind through the trees. John exhaled slowly, relief and adrenaline mixing in his chest. Ayanna allowed herself a small smile, but the fear in her eyes reminded them both that the danger was far from over. The next morning, John and Ayanna assessed the situation. They knew it was only a matter of time before the pursuers returned, and they needed a plan that was more than just hiding. Ayanna spoke quietly about her past, revealing pieces of the story she had kept secret. "I was accused of betraying my people," she said, her voice steady despite the pain behind it. "I didn't do it, but they believe I did. They will not stop until they have me." John listened carefully, feeling a mix of anger at the injustice and admiration for her courage. He realized that their survival depended not only on strategy, but also on understanding and confronting the truth. Together, they formulated a plan. Ayanna would speak directly with the tribal leaders, presenting the truth in a way that could not be ignored. John would support her, offering protection and guidance. They prepared for every possibility, from negotiation to confrontation, aware that their actions could change the course of their lives forever. As they worked, their trust in each other deepened. John admired Ayanna's bravery, her determination to face the consequences of her past rather than run indefinitely. Ayanna, in turn, felt gratitude and reliance on John, recognizing that he would stand by her no matter the danger. When the day of confrontation arrived, the tension was palpable. The tribal enforcers approached the ranch, their presence commanding and serious. John met them outside, his posture firm but respectful. Ayanna stepped forward beside him, her gaze unwavering. "I am innocent," she said clearly. "What happened was a mistake, not betrayal. I only tried to help someone and it went wrong. I ask for your understanding." Her voice carried conviction, and John could see the impact of her words in the expressions of those who had come to capture her. The tribal leaders listened carefully, their faces a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Questions were asked, explanations given, and slowly the truth emerged. Ayanna spoke with honesty and courage, detailing her actions, her intentions, and the circumstances that had led to the misunderstanding. John remained at her side, offering quiet support, ready to intervene if necessary. The process was tense, every word carrying weight, but Ayanna's strength shone through, unwavering in the face of scrutiny and doubt. After hours of discussion, a turning point came. The tribal leaders, impressed by her honesty and the integrity of her explanations, began to reconsider their stance. They asked John questions as well, seeking to understand why he had taken her in and protected her. John spoke calmly, explaining his actions, his respect for Ayanna, and his desire to ensure her safety. His sincerity and straightforwardness helped to ease tensions, bridging the gap between tribal expectations and the reality of Ayanna's circumstances. By evening, the confrontation had ended, though not without lingering tension. Ayanna's name was cleared, her innocence acknowledged. The tribal leaders, recognizing her courage and John's integrity, allowed her to remain at the ranch. Relief washed over both John and Ayanna, though the experience had left them weary. They had faced the shadows of the past together and emerged stronger, their bond forged in the crucible of danger and truth. That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth of the ranch house, John and Ayanna sat together, reflecting on the events of the day. "You were incredible," John said softly, his eyes meeting hers. "I've never seen anyone face fear like that." Ayanna shook her head, a faint smile on her lips. "I had to, and I couldn't have done it without you." The shared acknowledgement of their struggle and survival brought a quiet intimacy, a sense of partnership that went beyond words. Over the following weeks, life on the ranch slowly returned to a new kind of normal. The immediate danger had passed, but both John and Ayanna understood that life would never be quite the same. They worked together, repairing fences, tending to the cattle, and managing the land with a renewed sense of purpose. Their days were filled with the ordinary tasks of ranch life, yet beneath the surface, there was a quiet joy, a shared understanding that they had faced extraordinary challenges and come through together. John found himself thinking of Margaret less as a shadow over his life, and more as a memory that gave him strength. He realized that the love he had lost had prepared him to recognize the value of trust, courage, and companionship in unexpected places. Ayanna, in turn, began to feel a sense of belonging she had long thought impossible. The ranch, once a place of solitude for John, had become a sanctuary for them both, a place where the past could be acknowledged without being feared, and where the future could be faced with hope. Their bond, forged through danger, trust, and shared experience, deepened with each passing day. They learned to understand each other's fears and strengths, supporting one another in ways that were both practical and emotional. The lessons of survival, courage, and honesty had not only resolved the immediate crisis, but had also created a foundation for a life that neither had anticipated. And yet, even in this new stability, the land reminded them of its power and unpredictability. Storms would come again, challenges would arise, and life would continue to test their resolve. But John and Ayanna knew that together they could face whatever came. The confrontation with the past had been difficult and frightening, yet it had also revealed the depth of their resilience and the strength of their connection. In the quiet of the night, as they sat together watching the stars emerge above the Arizona plains, John realized that the ranch had changed him. He was no longer a man defined solely by solitude and loss. He was a man who had learned the value of trust, of courage, and of the unexpected ways in which life could bring new beginnings. Ayanna, sitting beside him, felt the same sense of cautious optimism. The past had shaped her, but it no longer controlled her. She was free to build a life, not defined by fear, but by choice, by hope, and by the bond she had forged with John. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls of the ranch house. Outside, the world was quiet, the only sounds the soft rustle of the wind through the trees and the distant calls of night birds. Inside, two people who had once been strangers now shared a home, a sense of safety, and the knowledge that they had faced life's harshest trials together. And as the night deepened, there was a quiet understanding that whatever the future held, they would meet it together, with courage, honesty, and an unbreakable bond. The days on the ranch settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and new. The immediate danger that had shadowed John Fletcher and Ayanna was gone, but the memory of it remained, a reminder of how fragile life could be and how quickly circumstances could change. Yet in the calm after the storm, there was a sense of hope and possibility that neither of them had felt in years. John rose early, as he always did, to tend to the cattle. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and the earthy aroma of the soil. Ayanna followed him quietly, carrying a small basket of eggs she had collected from the chicken coop. She moved with confidence now, no longer hesitant or afraid. The fear that had haunted her since the moment John had found her in the canyon had begun to fade, replaced by the strength of knowing she had a place where she belonged. As they worked side by side, John glanced at her and smiled. "You've become quite the rancher," he said, admiration in his voice. Ayanna looked up, a hint of amusement in her dark eyes. "I've learned from the best," she replied softly. There was warmth in the exchange, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond they shared. It was a bond built not only on trust, but also on shared experience, courage, and the understanding that each had saved the other in more ways than one. The ranch, which had once been a place of solitude for John, now felt alive with possibility. He found joy in the small things, the sound of Ayanna's laughter as a calf stumbled and tried to stand, the sight of her carefully repairing a fence, the quiet moments of conversation as they watched the sunset together. Life was no longer just about survival. It was about building, growing, and discovering the unexpected happiness that could emerge from hardship. Ayanna, for her part, began to embrace the life she had found on the ranch. She worked diligently, learning not only the practical skills needed to maintain the land, but also the rhythms of ranch life, the way to anticipate changes in weather, the signs of animals in distress, and the subtle patterns of the land itself. Each day brought a deeper understanding, not only of the ranch but also of herself. She had survived alone for so long that trusting another person had been almost impossible, yet now she allowed herself to rely on John, to share in both work and life. One afternoon, while walking along the edge of the property, John and Ayanna came across a part of the land that had been damaged by previous storms. The soil was loose, and some of the fencing had been washed away. John sighed but smiled faintly. "Looks like we have more work to do," he said. Ayanna nodded, her expression determined. "We can fix it together," she said. And together they did, working tirelessly to restore the land, their movements coordinated, their teamwork seamless. Through these shared tasks, their connection deepened. John found himself thinking of Margaret not with sorrow, but with a sense of gratitude for the love he had experienced, which had prepared him to recognize and embrace the new life that was unfolding. Ayanna, in turn, felt a sense of belonging she had never known. The land, the animals, and the bond with John gave her a home she had thought she might never have again. Together, they were creating a life built not on fear or survival, but on trust, respect, and mutual care. As the weeks passed, John noticed a change not only in Ayanna but also in himself. He laughed more easily, felt lighter, and began to see the beauty in the mundane tasks of ranch life. There was a rhythm to their days, a predictability that was comforting, yet also a richness that came from shared purpose and companionship. They celebrated small victories, repairing a fence, nursing a sick calf back to health, harvesting fresh vegetables from a small garden they had planted together. Each accomplishment strengthened their sense of unity and shared responsibility. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in brilliant hues of orange, pink, and purple, reflecting off the distant mountains. For a while they sat in silence, letting the colors and the quiet of the land fill them with peace. John broke the silence. "I never imagined life could feel this, full again," he said, his voice soft but steady. Yana turned to him, her eyes reflecting both the firelight and the fading glow of the sunset. "Neither did I," she admitted, "but it's better than I ever hoped." Their days were not without challenges. Storms would come, animals would fall ill, and the work was never-ending. Yet they faced these difficulties together, drawing strength from each other. The hardships that once seemed insurmountable became manageable, shared between two people who had learned to trust, rely upon, and support one another. John realized that life, even in its unpredictability, could hold beauty, love, and purpose when shared with someone who understood and cared. Yana also grew stronger emotionally. She learned to let go of the constant fear that had accompanied her for so long. The memory of being pursued, the secrets she had guarded so fiercely, no longer controlled her life. She found peace in the routine of ranch work, the companionship of John, and the knowledge that she had a place where she was safe and valued. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that was not defined by fear or running, but by choice, hope, and love. As time passed, their connection deepened in ways beyond daily work. They shared stories of their pasts, of joys and sorrows, triumphs and regrets. They laughed, celebrated small victories, and comforted one another in moments of doubt or worry. There was a quiet intimacy in their relationship, a bond built not on grand gestures but on the consistency of care, respect, and understanding. Each day strengthened the foundation of their life together, creating a sense of stability and belonging neither had known before. One morning, as the first light of dawn broke across the plains, John and Ayanna walked together to check on the cattle. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of wet soil and new growth. They moved side by side, speaking softly about plans for the day. Ayanna paused, looking out across the fields. "It feels like this land, like this life, is finally mine," she said. John smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. The ranch had become more than a place to survive. It was a place to thrive, to belong, to love, and to build a future. Evenings were filled with quiet reflection and shared gratitude. John often thought about how chance and circumstance had brought Ayanna into his life. What had begun as a rescue in the canyon had transformed into a partnership, a shared life full of meaning. Ayanna reflected similarly, grateful for the trust, care, and love that had allowed her to leave behind the shadows of her past and embrace a future full of promise. The seasons changed, bringing new challenges and new joys. Spring rains nurtured the land, summer heat tested endurance, autumn's cool breezes brought reflection, and winter's quiet calm encouraged rest. Through it all, John and Ayanna worked together, laughed together, and faced each day as a team. The ranch flourished under their care, and so did their relationship. Their shared experiences had created a bond that was unshakable, rooted in trust, respect, and love. One late afternoon, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch, sipping warm tea and watching the sun set. John turned to Ayanna, his expression soft but serious. "I've been thinking," he said. "We've faced so much together. I can't imagine my life without you now." Ayanna met his gaze, a small smile playing on her lips. "I feel the same," she replied. "We've built something I never thought I could have again." The moment was quiet, yet filled with significance. It was a recognition of the journey they had shared, the fear, the danger, the challenges, and the triumphs. It was also an acknowledgement of the life they had chosen to build together, a life filled with hope, trust, and love. The ranch, once a symbol of solitude for John and a place of fear for Ayanna, had become a home, a sanctuary, and a place where they could create a future together. In the weeks and months that followed, life continued in this new rhythm. John and Ayanna faced challenges, celebrated victories, and found joy in the ordinary and extraordinary moments alike. They worked hard, cared deeply, and built a life that honored both their pasts and their shared future. The land thrived under their care, reflecting the growth and resilience of the people who tended it. And as the sun set each evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors, John and Ayanna would sit together on the porch, hands intertwined, hearts full, and spirits at peace. The trials they had faced, the secrets revealed, and the dangers overcome had all led them to this place of stability, understanding, and hope. Their lives, once marked by solitude, fear, and loss, were now defined by love, trust, and the promise of a future built together. The ranch, the land, and the quiet rhythms of daily life had become more than work or survival. They had become a testament to resilience, courage, and the transformative power of trust and companionship. John and Ayanna had found not only safety but also belonging, not only love but also a partnership rooted in shared experiences and unwavering support. Together, they had faced the past, conquered fear, and embraced a future filled with possibility. And in the quiet of the night, as the stars shimmered above the Arizona plains and the world rested in peace, John and Ayanna knew that whatever challenges might come, they would face them together. They had discovered that life, even after loss and hardship, could hold beauty, hope, and a love that could endure all trials.